Have you ever had the love of your life look at you not with the blank void of forgetfulness, but with the searing fire of absolute disgust? I am not talking about that lost, sad, wandering look of someone desperately trying to find a name in a locked mental file cabinet. That would be a mercy compared to the living hell I endure daily. I am talking about a look of wrong, distorted recognition. A look that sees you not as the partner of 40 years who held her hand through life's terrifying storms and peaceful calms, but as the very incarnation of sin she was taught to fear and loathe in her youth. My name is Clara, and I am living the cruelest form of grief that exists, mourning someone who is still breathing, walking and speaking, but whose soul has been hijacked by an ancient, terrified version of herself. Helena and I built a magnificent cathedral of love upon the jagged ruins of prejudice. Back in the 80s, it wasn't easy. It was a war. We fled our suffocating small towns in the interior of Minas Gerais, fled from families who would genuinely prefer to see us miserable in sham marriages, to men we didn't love, than to see us happy together. We came to the big city with nothing but 2 battered suitcases and a desperate courage that only young, forbidden love can provide. We faced the world holding hands, literally, even when people spat on the ground as we passed. We traveled the world together, bought our dream house with the sweat of 2 jobs each, grew old together, trading the urgent, fiery physical passion of youth for the unshakable, comfortable tenderness of maturity. I knew every single line on her face, every invisible scar on her heart, every story she repeated at dinner parties until our friends could recite them by heart. I thought our love was the strongest thing in the universe, a fortress of granite that nothing, not even death itself, could ever tear down. I was devastatingly wrong. Alzheimer's is not just a thief of memories. It is a sadistic vandal that rewrites history with a poisoned pen. It started with small things, almost imperceptible glitches in the matrix of our lives. Keys lost in the refrigerator, names of famous actors forgotten in the middle of a movie. We laughed about it. Old age coming for us, we would say, clinking wine glasses. But then the regression truly began. Helena wasn't just forgetting the present. She was being violently sucked back into the past, back to the era before me, back to the time when she was a fervent Catholic girl, raised in an environment of suffocating guilt, terrified of hellfire, taught by severe priests and implacable parents that her deepest desires were dirty, that she was fundamentally wrong. Yesterday was the day the dam finally broke, drowning us both. I was helping her get dressed, as I have done every morning for 2 years since buttons became complex enigmas for her fumbling fingers. I tried to button the blue silk blouse I gave her for our 35th anniversary, a garment that used to make her eyes shine. It was a gesture of care I had performed 1,000 times, a quiet, intimate moment of ours. Suddenly, her body went completely rigid like steel. She shoved me, with a raw physical strength I didn't know she still possessed in her frail frame. I fell backward onto the bed, shocked and breathless. She shrank away into the farthest corner of the room, pulling the collar of her blouse tight as if I were trying to strangle her. She was clutching an antique silver crucifix I didn't even know she still kept, squeezing it until her knuckles turned bone white. "Get your hands off me," she screamed, and her eyes were wide with genuine primal terror. It wasn't confusion, it was absolute panic. "Who are you? Why are you in my bedroom in a nightgown? Where is my mother? I want my mother." I tried to stay calm, swallowing the massive lump in my throat that threatened to choke me. "Helena, my love, calm down. It's me, Clara, you're Clara. We live here together. I am your wife." It was the wrong word. The word wife acted like the trigger of a bomb. Her face contorted into a mask of biblical repulsion and horror that I had never seen directed at me, not even on the worst days of rampant homophobia we faced on the streets in the 80s. "Wife? I don't have a wife." "That's a lie. That is a mortal sin. You are a pervert, a temptation of the devil sent to test me." She began frantically making the sign of the cross over and over, muttering prayers in Latin I didn't even know she remembered. "Get out of my house in the name of God, get out. Do not touch me with those dirty hands." I stood there paralyzed, frozen in the bedroom we had shared for 4 decades, surrounded by our photos, our books, our life, watching the woman I loved more than anything in existence treat me as if I were Satan himself. She didn't remember our kisses, our trips to the beach, the comfort we gave each other when her parents died. She only remembered the paralyzing fear she felt at 15. Alzheimer's had erased the free, brave, happy woman she became by my side, and brought back the scared, repressed girl she once was. And I don't know how to fight an enemy that is entrenched inside her own mind, using her childhood faith as a sharp weapon against us. Before I continue to tell you how I tried to survive this daily hell, I want to ask you a favor. If you are moved by real stories of love, struggle, and the painful fragility of the human mind, please subscribe to the channel. Every day we will have a new story here, ready to touch your heart and make you reflect on what truly defines us. Your subscription helps us keep telling these difficult truths. Life became a literal minefield inside our own home, a place that had once been our sanctuary of peace and acceptance. I had to learn to play roles just to be able to care for her without triggering psychotic episodes. I could no longer be Clara, the wife, the lover, the companion of a lifetime. I had to become the hired nurse, the efficient housekeeper, and on her better, less paranoid days, a distant cousin who came to spend some time helping out. It was a daily humiliation, a thin, constant, agonizing pain, having to diminish myself, to erase our glorious 40-year history, just so she could eat soup at lunch without throwing the plate against the wall while screaming "sinner" at me. I hid our photo albums, the ones filled with happy memories in Paris, in Rio, in our little country house. I took down the framed pictures from the walls where we were hugging, smiling, free. Every object I wrapped in newspaper and stored in a cardboard box at the back of the closet felt like burying a living piece of us. Our house became sterile, impersonal, a theater set carefully arranged not to offend the rigid, resurrected morality of the new old Helena. But the worst times were the nights, the night terrors. She started locking our bedroom door from the inside, dragging a heavy chair under the doorknob, terrified that I might enter. I started sleeping on the uncomfortable living room sofa, listening to her pray loudly on the other side of the door, sometimes for hours on end, begging God for forgiveness for impure thoughts and for being under the same roof as iniquity. One freezing Tuesday night, I woke up with an acrid smell of smoke invading the living room. My heart hammered against my ribs. I ran to the backyard. The scene was dantesque. Helena was there, in a thin nightgown in 50-degree weather, barefoot on the wet grass. She had dragged the metal trash can to the middle of the lawn and started a fire in it. She was throwing things inside, feeding the flames with a manic, terrifying energy. I ran to her, stumbling in the dark. "Helena! My God, what are you doing?" "You're going to burn yourself." She turned to me. Her eyes shone with the reflection of the flames and with a fanatical fervor that wasn't hers. It belonged to some ancient preacher who still lived, shouting in her head. "I am cleansing this house of sin," she screamed, her voice hoarse from the smoke. "All of this needs to burn so that God can enter again." I looked inside the burning trash can. My stomach turned violently. They were my clothes, my favorite flannel shirts, the ones she gave me last Christmas because I was always cold. They were our poetry books, and right in the middle of the orange flames, I saw the leather edge of a book being consumed. It was our travel journal, where we wrote down every dream we realized together. Years of memories turning into ash and black smoke in front of my eyes. In a desperate impulse, I tried to stick my hand into the fire to save the journal. The heat was intense. It burned the tips of my fingers instantly. "Don't touch it!" she yelled, slapping my burned hand away with surprising strength. "It's dirty. All of this is dirty! Let the fire purify it!" I fell to my knees on the damp grass, sobbing convulsively while she continued to throw our life into the fire, reciting psalms of purification aloud to drown out my sobs. She didn't see my pain. She only saw the twisted redemption she was achieving. The next day, the final blow arrived. Her family, people who hadn't visited us in 20 years, who disowned us every Christmas. A distant nephew, Marcos, a man I barely knew, had heard rumors about her illness in town and came to check on the situation. When Helena opened the door and saw him, she didn't see an opportunistic stranger. She saw a savior sent from heaven. She hugged him, weeping, as if she were a prisoner finally being liberated. "Thank God you came. Thank God someone from my real family is here." She sobbed into his shoulder, clinging to him. "This woman, this Clara, she keeps me prisoner here. She says horrible things, Marcos. She says we are married. It is an abomination. It is against God's law. She wants to pervert me." The nephew looked at me over her shoulder. I saw the glint in his eyes. It wasn't family concern. It was cold opportunity. He saw the big house, the accumulated assets, and a vulnerable aunt who suddenly adored him and hated me. He smiled, that smug, self-satisfied smile of someone who always knew this was wrong, and now had divine proof. "Don't worry, Aunt Helena," he said, stroking her back and looking at me with triumph. "We are going to get you out of here. We are going to take you to a holy place, a decent place, far away from this evil influence." They wanted to take her. They wanted to exploit the cruel loophole of her disease to rescue her back into the repressive gray life from which I had saved her with so much effort 40 years ago. And the worst part of all, she wanted to go with them. She was begging to be taken by her original jailers. The legal battle for Helena's guardianship began immediately, and it was the dirtiest thing I have ever faced. I had documents, of course. We had a stable union registered with a notary. We had reciprocal healthcare powers of attorney signed years ago, when we were still lucid and cautious about the future. I naively thought that would be enough. I was wrong. The nephew, Marcos, didn't play fair. He hired a lawyer connected to ultra-conservative religious groups who saw the case as an exemplary cause to be won at all costs. They weren't just fighting for custody. They were fighting to annul our entire history. Marcos used Helena herself as his main weapon against me. He visited her when I wasn't home, or when I was locked in my room to avoid conflicts that agitated her, and recorded videos of her on his phone. Terrible videos, where Helena, confused and indoctrinated by his visits, looked at the camera and said things that broke my heart repeatedly. "I am being held captive by a sinner," she said in the video, her eyes glazed with fear. "I want to go to the Santa Maria nursing home, which my nephew suggested. They have mass every day there. I want to be saved." Marcos showed these videos to social workers, to expert doctors, to the judge. I was painted as the monster, the predator taking advantage of a vulnerable elderly woman. "She is lucid regarding her current religious desires," his lawyer argued in court, with a meek, poisonous voice that made my skin crawl. Forcing her to live in an environment that directly affronts her rescued faith is a violation of her basic human rights. It is psychological torture to keep a fervent Catholic lady living in a homosexual union that she now abhors. It was maddening. Her disease itself, the cruelest symptom of Alzheimer's, was being used as a valid legal argument to validate their homophobia. I tried to talk to her during the rare moments of calm, when the fog seemed less dense. I would sit at her feet, hold her wrinkled hands in mine. "Helena, my love, look at me. Really look. It's me, Clara. Do you remember our trip to Bahia? The day we found Popoca, our little dog, on the road. Sometimes, for a thousandth of a second, I saw a crack in the armor, a frown, a glimmer of doubt in her eyes, as if a real memory were desperately trying to swim to the surface through an ocean of thick fog. Popoca," she would murmur, her voice soft, and for an instant, the rigid tension in her shoulders would relax. I would hold my breath, full of hope. But soon the fog returned, denser, darker. Her eyes would harden. She would pull her hands away as if burned. "I don't know any Popoca. Stop trying to confuse me with your lies, demon. You want to take me. To hell with you." And she would go back to clutching the rosary, muttering repetitive prayers, using them as a physical shield against my love. I was exhausted, physically, mentally, and spiritually destroyed. I lost 20 pounds. My friends told me to give up, to let her go if that was what the new Helena wanted. "Clara, you are killing yourself for someone who has already died," they said with pity. "Let her go. Take care of yourself. But how could I? I promised in sickness and in health. I didn't promise only if you still love me, or only if you remember me. Love is not a commercial transaction. It is an absolute commitment of the soul. I knew that if I let her go with that nephew, she would die surrounded by people who hated who she really was during the 40 happiest years of her life. They would erase our history, burn the rest of the photos, say at her funeral that she repented and returned to Jesus. I couldn't allow that. I was the only guardian of the truth of who Helena really was. I decided that no matter how much she cursed me, no matter how much she looked at me with disgust, no matter how much she hurt me, I would stay. I would be the villain in the distorted story of her diseased mind, so I could continue to be the heroine in the reality of her life. I would continue cleaning her when she soiled herself, feeding her by mouth when she could no longer hold the spoon, protecting her from the family vultures, even if she hated me for every second of it. It was the final, terrible price of my love, and I was willing to pay it down to the last cent. The disease advanced with a speed that was both merciful and cruel at the same time. In a matter of months, the intense religious aggression gave way to a confused, foggy apathy. She no longer had the energy to curse me as much, because she no longer spoke much at all. The words got lost in a tangle of meaningless sounds. She spent her days sitting in the armchair in the living room, staring at nothing, at some invisible point on the wall, still holding the rosary with trembling, arthritic hands, but without the strength or coherence to pray the prayers she once used as a weapon. The nephew, Marcos, stopped visiting as soon as he realized the well had run dry. Helena's money was being drained rapidly by the astronomical costs of 24-hour nurses, geriatric diapers, expensive medications, and home adaptations. His faith and family concern couldn't withstand the lack of funds to inherit. We were just the two of us again, finally, isolated on our island of shipwrecked memory. But it was a loneliness for two, silent and deep. I tried to fill the silence. I played our old songs on the record player. Chico Buarque, Maria Bethania, the songs we danced to in our living room so many times. Sometimes, very rarely, she would sway her head slightly to the rhythm, a muscle reflex of a forgotten joy that still lived somewhere deep in her body, even if her mind had already erased it. I read to her every afternoon. I read our favorite poems, the ones we used to recite to each other in bed before sleeping. One rainy afternoon, while I was reading a sonnet by Pablo Neruda, I love you without knowing how or when or from where, she turned slowly. She looked at me, really looked, focusing eyes that for weeks had seemed to look right through me. There wasn't the full recognition of before, that shine of, it's you, my love. But there was no longer hate, fear, or religious disgust either. There was something new. There was curiosity, a childlike, soft curiosity. She tilted her head a little to the side, like a bird studying something strange. You, she said, her voice weak, hoarse from disuse, every syllable a monumental effort. You are very good to me. My heart stopped in my chest. I stopped reading. I sat motionless, afraid that any movement might break that fragile moment. It was the first kind sentence, the first real, positive connection she had made with me in 2 years of nightmare. Why do you stay here? She asked with a sudden, frightening lucidity. I am a boring old woman. I treated you badly. Tears began to stream down my face without my control. She remembered. Somehow, on some deep level, she knew she had been cruel. I stay because I love you, Helena, I said, risking everything again. risking unleashing the religious fury once more. "I love you more than anything in this world." She didn't scream. She didn't recoil. She frowned, as if trying to solve a very complex mathematical equation with missing pieces. "Love me?" she repeated, testing the word in her mouth. "But we are two women. Isn't that wrong?" The priest said. I put the book down. I knelt on the floor right in front of her armchair and took her wrinkled, cold hands in mine. "No, my love. It's not wrong. It never was. It is the most right, beautiful, and true thing that ever existed in my life. Our love was beautiful. We were very, very happy." She looked at our joined hands. She traced my wedding ring with her finger, the one I never took off, and then looked at her own finger, where her ring still was, loose now that she had lost so much weight. "Were we?" she asked, with infinite sadness in her voice, a single solitary tear running down the deep valley of a wrinkle on her face. "I don't remember. I try, but it's all smoke. I feel like I lost something very important. There is a hole in here." She let go of one hand and touched her own chest, over her heart. "It hurts. It hurts so much not knowing what I lost." I cried with her, sharing that unbearable pain. "I am here to remember for both of us, Helena," I promised, kissing her hands. "I will fill this hole every day. I will tell you who you were, who we were, until the end." In that moment, on the living room rug, there was no miracle of recovery. Her memory didn't magically return, but there was a truce. The religious hatred, which wasn't hers but implanted in her like a virus in childhood, finally gave way to her true essence, which had always been love. The end came on a calm Tuesday night, gently, like a visitor you have expected for a long time, and for whom you have already left the door unlocked. Helena was in the hospital bed we had set up in the middle of our living room because the bedroom had become too small for so much equipment. She was very weak, her breathing shallow, irregular, a rasping sound that filled the silent house. The palliative care doctor had already come and increased the morphine dose to ensure she felt no pain. I knew it was time. The last night. I dismissed the night nurse. I wanted to be alone with her. I wanted it to be just the two of us at the end, as we were at the beginning. I turned off the main lights, leaving only the corner lamp on, creating a golden, cozy twilight. I lay down on the narrow bed beside her, careful not to pull any tubes, fitting my body into the little space left, just as we had done for 40 years in single beds, hotel beds, camping sleeping bags. I held her hand. It was light, almost weightless, the skin thin like tissue paper. She had her eyes closed, seeming to sleep a deep, distant sleep. I stayed there for hours, speaking softly into her ear, telling her our stories in the dark, one last time. I told her about the day we met in the college library, when we knocked over a pile of books together and laughed until we were kicked out by the librarian. I told her about our first trip to see the ocean, how she was afraid of the waves at first, and then didn't want to get out of the water. I told her about how she always burned the toast at breakfast for 40 years, and how I always ate the burnt toast and pretended I liked it, just not to upset her, because her smile was worth any taste of charcoal. I would eat 1,000 burnt toasts just to have one more breakfast with you, Lucid, I whispered, my tears wetting her pillow. I wanted the last thing she heard in this world to be about us, about love, about joy, not about guilt, sin, or fear of hell. Suddenly, near 3 a.m, her breathing changed. She opened her eyes. I expected the blank stare or the look of fear. But no, they were clear, surprisingly, miraculously clear. The fog of Alzheimer's had dissipated for a brief, precious, final second, like the sun breaking through heavy clouds before setting. She turned her head slightly and looked directly at me. She saw me. She really saw me, her Clara, not the nurse, not the demon. Clara, she whispered, the sound of my name on her lips, said with that familiar intonation of affection, was the most beautiful and devastating sound in the world. Hi, my love, I said, swallowing my tears so as not to scare her, smiling for her. I'm here. You stayed, she said with a gentle, wonderful wonder, as if she were discovering a treasure. You stayed with me, even when I was so horrible, even when I forgot. I would always stay, I said firmly. There was no other place in the world I could be. She squeezed my hand. It was a weak squeeze, almost imperceptible, but the intention was all there. I'm sorry, she said, a tear sliding from the corner of her eye. I forgot the best part. I forgot us. How could I forget us? It's okay, my love, I said, kissing her hand, kissing her forehead, trying to absorb every second of that miracle. Don't worry about that. I remembered for you. I kept everything safe for both of us. She smiled. It was that smile. The smile that made me fall in love with her 40 years ago. The smile that lit up everything. I love you, Clara, she said with a final clarity. That I never really forgot. It was just hidden, in a safe place where the disease couldn't touch it. She closed her eyes again, still smiling. The smile remained on her lips while her breathing became slower, more spaced out. Long intervals of silence between each sigh. I stayed there, hugging her body, feeling life gently slip away, until it stopped, the final silence. But I didn't feel despair. I felt an immense peace invade the room. She had come back to me at the end. Just for a minute, but it was enough to redeem years of pain. Love had beaten the disease, beaten the dogma, beaten the oblivion. She left knowing who she was, and knowing she was mine, and that was all I needed to be able to keep living without her.